The NSFAS, meanwhile, has appointed auditing firms, KPMG and BDO Global, to help it with problems facing the fund. The administrator, Freeman Nomvalo, says this will help tackle backlogs. He joins us now for more on that conversation. Good to have you, sir, and thank you very much for your time. Were you hearing this for the first time, or were you aware that the terms of reference, as it pertains to your term, have been altered?
Well, as the minister states that this was published on the 1st of August, so it has been around for a few days already.
And in your view, I mean, does that help the work of the scheme to cut your term short? You're supposed to be there for 12 months. It seems you are now going to be there for slightly less than that, having occupied that office since April.
Look, my focus has got to be to make sure that the work that is outstanding, that still needs to be done between now and then, is done so that it lays the foundation for a smooth transition from the work that I've been doing to the work that the board, once it's appointed, will do. I think that's the only really important thing that one has to focus on, to make sure that you create a condition that will enable that to happen.
Let me put it this way. So you would have outlined a number of things. One, costly and unreliable direct payment mechanism to students, delayed payments to private accommodation, delayed finalization of the 2023-24 funding, and non-submission of annual reports and financial statements, amongst the things that you've counted. You've got 5 months left. Will you be able to finalize all that work in this 5 months?
The issue of the financial statements, we must make sure that the financial statements for 2024 are ready for tabling by the end of this calendar year. That's too late already, but that's the situation that we find ourselves in, and we've got to make sure that that happens. And when that happens, it enables Parliament and other oversight structures to be able to engage with matters that face NSFAS on a more current basis, and then can stand a chance of making the NSFAS works better. That's one. The issues relating to the closeout report, there's a lot of ground that has been covered already. We hope that by that time, all of the institutions will have been reconciled and closed. If not, there should be just a handful that is left. 3, the issues of planning for next year, we need to get cracking on doing those things so that when the students apply, we're opening the applications on the 1st of September. When we open for the applications, there should be a smooth process that enables that. And to the extent that, of course, to review systems and rebuild systems takes a long time. So that cannot be achieved at that time. But we can look at the current systems as they are and do the patchwork that will enable us to open the current applications as well as the appeal processes. That won't be perfect, but we can make sure that it functions in a way that enables students to be registered and for their matters to be handled accordingly. Time is always an enemy when you're dealing with complex issues, but we are not in a position to question the direction that the minister is taking. We serve at the behest of a minister that is in the department, and therefore we take our cue from there, and then we can look at issues to the extent that we can assist.
Interesting that the minister says they are, of course, as the party, resolving to form a committee that is going to deal with the student housing issues. Now, you have already engaged 2 auditing firms to deal with the same issues. Are you not duplicating work there?
Well, I don't think the minister is talking about, and obviously I cannot speak for the minister. You will recall that in May already, we met with the accommodation providers in Pretoria. And in that meeting, in Johannesburg, and in that meeting, we agreed with the stakeholders that we would set up that structure. And I'm hoping the minister is referring to the same structure. So there would be continuity there. we are already embarking on the roadshow. And again, the report from that roadshow will inform the work that has to be done. I think the issue of continuity is going to be clear, because the issues the minister is talking to are the issues that are aligned to the issues that the administration has been dealing with.
Key to what you have seen in the 100 days or so that you have been in office is that the centralized model or centralization model is at the heart of some of the challenges that NSFAS is currently going through as a scheme. A regional approach, you believe, would be better. Why so?
It's about ensuring accessibility to the stakeholders, accessibility to the students, so that issues that affect students can be resolved timelessly on the spot. So the issue of the presence of NSFAS across the country is necessary, and the stakeholders have been crying for that. And our thinking around this issue is being responsive to the views of our stakeholders and being responsive to the needs of the students that must be attended to by the scheme.
Now, the regionalization model will have cost implications. You already are saying NSFAS could be overstretched and therefore constrained from meeting its obligation. Would that not then also stretch those funds even further, much to the detriment of the students who should be benefiting?
You are assuming that when you do that, creating that accessibility of the scheme, you are going to be adding new investment, but you could redirect resources that are already there to make sure that you service the stakeholders better. It's not about adding resources only, but also about the best utilization of the resources that we have at our disposal. We don't see that as a way of adding additional costs, but we see it as a way of creating efficiencies and creating proximity to the stakeholders to ensure that there is quicker responses to the issues facing students, and thereby creating a much better environment for the scheme.
Either way, it has cost implications. You might not be costing more, you will be redirecting cost.
Yes, that's the point I'm making. We occupying in Cape Town X square meters at the moment. If you create if you're creating that accessibility, you may redeploy people from the center and reduce the space that you're having in Cape Town and occupy space elsewhere. So it's not automatic that you're going to be adding resources, but you can actually redeploy resources in a way that ensures better efficiency and better utilization of assets.
NSFAS losing millions of rands monthly to intermediary activities. Explain that. What is that exactly?
Well, for one, the direct payment mechanism, the cost per transaction are at least 20-something rands when they should be less than 1 rand. And that is inefficiency in spending. We are reviewing the issue of the solution providers to see if there are efficiencies there. But again, already we've identified that there may be inefficiencies that we need to deal with. The extent of those inefficiencies are yet to be determined. So those are the savings that are, which I think are the low-lying fruits in terms of the savings. Obviously, they've got implications. You've engaged into a contract with other stakeholders. To unwind those contracts, there's issues that you need to deal with to make sure that fairness is achieved in that process. While we save, we also do not create unnecessary hardships where we can avoid it.
So you believe NSFAS could build internal capacity in IT, for example, to be able to disperse the funds in a way that I suppose you would have envisaged with the online service providers?
The investment needed for the disbursement of funds is not extensive. And already what we are doing for the TVET colleges is proof to that point. So our determination and our observation and experience in the land doing things differently, you can create a lot of efficiencies. And we believe that is true even for the issue of accommodation.
Yeah. Let's talk about that issue of accommodation. You're saying, of course, NSFAS is not built to do accommodation accreditation, and you end up losing a whole lot of money there in itself. What is the best way of handling that situation?
Well, we've got to allow the task team to advise, because there's a good reason why that decision was taken. The mandate is in the legislation, and in the mandate, there's nothing that talks to that. But a learning process cannot happen without a student being in an accommodation. So there is a relationship. And therefore, the manner in which that relationship is addressed in the business model is important. And the task team, and the minister made a reference to the task team as well, the task team would be able to advise accordingly how that should be crafted and implemented.
So would you then still see independent players coming in to rate and accredit those facilities, or are you talking here in the future or over time building internal capacity to be able to do that?
Well, if you can get that capacity in the market, there's no point in building that capacity. The question is, how do you access that in a way that is cost effective, and how do you deploy it in a manner that is efficient? There are things which you need to build internal capacity, but there are things which you need to rely on the available competencies in the country.
Let's talk a little bit then about what you've already mentioned. As you've said, it will take longer, I suppose, than the 5 months that you have left, but a organizational re-engineering and realignment project that is already in place. What are the new resources that would be allocated to fit this particular new model that you're talking about?
That's the conversation we've got to have with the Treasury when our calculations are done, and we'll be meeting the Treasury in the next 2 weeks or so. So that's the conversation we've got to have with the Treasury as part and parcel of the planning for next year. And if there's additional resources required, or if there is redirecting of some of the existing resources that is required, so that to the extent that they were allocated for a different purpose, they can be redirected to the purposes that are going to enable a quicker turnaround of the scheme. So those conversations will be taking place, and in some instances we may need additional investment, but in most instances we believe that we should be able to redirect resources.
Yeah. Let's talk then about for example, things like the closing out report having been delayed, and of course we know what impact that would have had on disbursement in the new financial year and so on and so forth. Would you say those challenges arise from poor planning, or would you say they arise from poor working relations with institutions?
Look, the manifestation of problems tend to take the form of a technical issue, i.e. failing to submit financial statements, failing to do something, or contracting in a manner that is inefficient. I believe that the underlying cause of all of these things is vested interest. Organizations fail to function according to the mandate that they have because vested interest takes priority over the core mandate of the entity. Now, if we can get a better understanding and a better handle of what that looks like, I'm sure we'll be able to have technical solutions that are targeted at ensuring that the organization responds to the challenges that those vested interests bring to bear.
And is that something that can certainly be improved in the short term?
Certainly, there are things you can achieve in the short term, and where there's vested interest, it becomes very elusive. So there is going to be a degree of experimentation on some of the things, but on most of the things, you've got to nail them very, very quickly. So there are things that you can make gains very early, i.e. the direct payments. We were able to within a very short period of time, working with our internal stakeholders, create a mechanism that services the TVET colleges. So there are things that we can do within a short period of time, but most of the things will require a bit of a runway to execute in order for them to also be embedded in the system.
Are all stakeholders on board? I mean, as far as that particular process is concerned?
Most stakeholders, in fact, I have not found a stakeholder that I've interacted with. I've interacted with students, I've interacted with workers and the workers' formations as in unions. I've interacted with the leadership of the universities, leadership of TVET colleges. I've interacted with the service providers of the NSFAS. So I find that there is a general agreement that a working NSFAS is necessary for all of us. So there is a good deal of agreement. Of course, it's easy to agree at the high level of abstraction on things. When we get down to the detail and one particular party has to sacrifice something to deliver the outcome that has been agreed upon, that's where you begin to find divergence in terms of how people perceive the specific interventions that come into play. But generally, there is agreement. And of course, the taste of the pudding, as I say, will be in the implementation. And when stakeholders have to sacrifice something to make that happen, they might review their positions.
You've already mentioned continuity as a possibility in terms of the work that you've already undertaken. One of the things you highlighted is the administration governance framework. What are the fruits that that particular framework is beginning to bear?
Well, it's enabling a better decision-making process. Governance is about decision-making. So creating a structure, even though you're operating as a solo entity, creating a structure that enables to give you the sounding board, as well as question some of your thinking, is critical. And creating that governance framework was meant to make sure that while you have the anomaly of a single individual occupying the board position, you also have a way in which decisions are made that is sensible, transparent, but also those can be questioned in the process, and better quality decisions then can arise from that.
So, for example, things like what we have, of course, spoken to you about in the last 2 months of the late disbursements of allowances. Could that be linked to this framework, or is the framework the thing that is now assisting that particular process to run smoother?
Well, it's assisting that process. That process arises out of challenges that are symptomatic of the past. So in coming to a conclusion of how you resolve that, obviously, when there's a burning issue, we had people coming to our offices to raise queries and issues. We've got to respond to those on the spot and find answers. And in so doing, make progress that is necessary to generate the energy which is needed to make the change in an organization. But at the same time, you can then slow that down by creating that governance structure that says, wait a minute, have you considered other things? Have you thought about these other issues? And how would you respond should such were to happen? That creates that ability to reflect and take another look at the issues as well. But when a crisis befalls you, you've got to act and act quickly.
You seem to be pointing to something here which, of course, we would have experienced in the last 2 months to some extent, that you could have a interface challenge in getting the challenges that students are facing, or if there's a crisis, in getting the information coming to you more than it does probably get to the student bodies and getting to the media before it gets to you. So we would hear of 11,000 students who have not received their allowances, and you would come and say, but as far as we are concerned, we don't have 11,000 students who have not received their allowances. And it becomes that back and forth. What is the challenge there?
Well, when it comes to students and allowances, and you're making reference to the number of 11,000, the exact number is 11,269 in this instance. These are the students whom we haven't received their bank accounts, or to the extent that they submitted their bank accounts, those bank accounts have failed verification for a number of reasons. So it begs the question, and we haven't had complaints, by the way. So it begs the question, except to the extent that the verification has failed, but for the other students that would not have submitted their banking details, you then ask your question, do they in fact exist? And that's the question that we have to answer going forward. But we had a very good response from students when we asked them to submit their bank accounts. It's well in excess of 90% that submitted, and only about 6% still remains. And there's an investigation that seeks to uncover that and understand where do the anomalies arise. And to the extent that there are verification issues, again, there's a process, a more detailed process to enable that the credibility of the information, the person who's trying to verify on the other side, is it a legitimate student who in fact exists and is a student that NSFAS is funding, and that student is in an institution of higher learning pursuing their studies. So those verification processes become more critical when you find that small number that keeps jumping up for one reason or the other.
What is the timeline that you have given to KPMG and BDO to finalize their work?
Well, the specific issue that they are dealing with is three issues, basically. One issue is assisting in the finalization of the financial statements. Second issue is the closeout project. And the third issue is the student accommodation disbursement issues. And those issues, to the extent that there's historical problems relating to them, we must be closed with them by the end of this calendar year at different end dates. But by the end of this calendar year, we must have that behind us. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to respond to the current challenges that students face accordingly if we still have to deal with historical information. So that work has to be done by the end of the year. And of course, with the impending end of the road for the administration, we've got to sit down with these stakeholders and look at what then can be delivered, what will be handed over to the new leadership when the new leadership takes over.
Yeah. I'm sure you would have heard that one of the things that the Lekgotla would have reflected on, according to the minister there, it's maladministration, or what you would call flouting of procurement processes. From the office of the administrator, what have you set in motion as far as addressing that?
Well, there's a number of issues that one is to look into those cases where there are allegations of such, so that you can ascertain what has happened and take further steps. To create a degree of transparency on the impact of that. We talk about having established various registers, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure, contract register, to make sure that there's transparency and the public can see what has happened. And then that will create a better environment for rectifying those. And the third piece is to develop systems and a set of internal controls, systems of internal controls that ensure that these are avoided in the future.
Mr. Nomvalo, let me appreciate your time. Let's leave it there for this evening. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
That is Freeman's Nomvalo, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme Administrator there, on his 100th day in office, and of course the next 5 months that are left, it seems, in his term to get things straight there in that scheme. All right, we'll continue in a moment here in Focus.